Hi viewers, you are listening the Alpha King's Untold Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race and you will enjoy it a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1: The Howling Void. The last day of the year was always a time of fierce celebration for the Silvermane pack. Bonfires clawed at the frosty sky, and the air thrummed with the vibrations of eager howls. Laughter, deep and rumbling, mingled with the scent of roasting meat and spiced wine. It was a night of power, of pack, of unity. Yet, for one soul, it was a night of profound and utter silence. Lyra stood at the very edge of the light, where the warmth of the flames surrendered to the biting cold of the forest. Her small weathered cabin was a dark smudge against the snow-dusted pines, a monument to her exile. She was not part of the celebration. She was merely permitted to witness it from a distance. The curse of the muted wolf, they called it. Since her first shift, her wolf had been a silent, ghostly presence within her, a form she could take, but without the voice, without the primal connection to the pack mind. A wolf who cannot howl is no wolf at all. So she was forgotten, an outcast, a shadow. She pulled her thin shawl tighter, her breath a pale cloud in the moonlight. The magnificent New Year's moon was beginning its ascent, a colossal silver coin against the velvet black. It was said to be a moon of change, of potent magic, but for Lyra, moons had always just been moons. They brought cold and light, and nothing else. Inside the heart of the celebration, Alpha King Kael stood upon the stone of ascendancy. He was a mountain of a man, with eyes the color of a stormy sky, and a presence that commanded the very air around him. He raised a goblet, his voice a resonant baritone that stilled the crowd. Tonight we honor the old year, we honor our strength, our victories, and tomorrow we seize the new. A roar of approval answered, but as the sound washed over him, a sudden sharp twist pierced his chest, right beneath his sternum. It wasn't pain, it was a pull, a yearning so intense it stole his breath. His eyes, sharp and seeking, ripped away from his adoring pack and speared into the darkness beyond the firelight. His wolf, a mighty beast named Storm, surged within him, not with aggression, but with a desperate, keening whine. Mate. The word echoed in his soul, not as a thought, but as a fundamental, undeniable truth. His eyes narrowed, searching the shadows. There, a slight figure, turning away from the warmth, retreating into the lonely dark. At that exact moment, the New Year's moon cleared the treetops, and it changed. A ripple of ancient silver energy pulsed from its surface, visible as a shimmering wave that washed over the entire territory. The air crackled with static, and every wolf, from the smallest pup to the eldest elder, felt a jolt of power. Kael gasped, his hand flying to his chest. The pole became a chain, yanking him forward. The connection had awakened, forged in that instant of lunar magic. His mate was out there, in the darkness, and she was leaving. Without a word to his stunned beta or the confused elders, Kael moved. He leaped from the stone, his form blurring as he shifted in midair. Where a man had stood, a colossal midnight black wolf now landed, paws silent on the hardened snow. He did not howl, he simply ran, a streak of shadow and purpose, abandoning the feast, abandoning his duty, and following the silent call that led toward the outcast's cabin. Lyra had just reached her door when she felt it, a warmth in her own chest, a faint fluttering echo of a heartbeat that was not her own. She froze, her hand on the rough wood. Then she heard it, the soft, powerful footfalls approaching, not the playful patter of a pack wolf, but the deliberate, earth-conscious tread of a predator. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, and she saw him, the Alpha King in his wolf form, emerging from the tree line like a piece of the night given life. His silver-flecked eyes locked on hers, and the world stopped. The noise of the distant celebration vanished. The cold ceased to matter. In that gaze, she saw not pity, not disdain, but a recognition so deep it felt like falling. He padded closer, each step measured. He stopped a mere breath away, his great head lowering to her level. Lyra should have been terrified, but the warmth in her chest spread, melting the perpetual ice of her loneliness. Tentatively, she reached out a trembling hand. Before her fingers could touch the dark fur between his ears, a furious voice shattered the moment. "My king, stop!" Elder Brahm, his face etched with horror and rage, emerged from the path, followed by others. "You cannot. She is the muted one, the cursed one. The moon's magic has tricked you." Kael shifted back in a ripple of muscle and power, standing protectively in front of Lyra. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried the weight of the mountains. "You will address your alpha with respect, Elder, and you will not speak of my mate in such terms again." The word mate, spoken aloud, so definitively, sent a fresh shockwave through the howling onlookers. Lyra felt their stares like physical blows, piercing, hostile, disbelieving. She wanted to shrink, to disappear back into her cabin and the familiar, painful safety of her solitude. But the strange new warmth in her core, that humming connection to the formidable man standing before her, held her rooted to the spot. Kael finally turned his head, just slightly, his stormy eyes finding hers. In them she saw not power, but a question, a silent offering. He was giving her a choice, even now. It was more kindness than she had received in a decade. Swallowing the lump of fear in her throat, she gave the tiniest nod. A flicker of something like relief passed through his gaze. He turned fully to face the elders, his authority radiating from him in an almost visible wave. "The celebration is over. Return to your homes. We will speak of this at the council meeting at dawn." It was not a suggestion. It was a royal command. With reluctant bows and heated whispers, the crowd dispersed, melting back into the trees toward the distant firelight. Soon, only Kael and Lyra remained in the lonely clearing. The silence now was different, charged and fragile. Kael shifted fully back into his human form, retrieving a cloak that had been left nearby. He approached her slowly, as one would a skittish deer. "Lyra," he said her name, and it sounded like a sacred thing on his lips. I know this is overwhelming." Overwhelming. The word was so vast it was meaningless. Her world had been a small gray room, and in an instant its walls had been blasted apart to reveal a terrifying, brilliant cosmos. She opened her mouth, but only a soft, broken breath emerged. She gestured helplessly at her throat, a familiar shame heating her cheeks. She could not speak to him, not with words. He understood. "You don't need to speak," he murmured, his voice gentler than she could have ever imagined it being. "The bond, it tells me enough. Your fear, your confusion, it is a storm inside you." He was feeling her emotions. The realization was mortifying and exhilarating all at once. He draped the heavy, warm cloak around her shoulders. The scent of pine and frost and pure, clean power enveloped her. "Come with me," he said. It was not an order, but a request. "You cannot stay here tonight, not after this." Lyra looked back at her tiny, dark cabin, the only home she had ever known. It represented safety, but it also represented a lifetime of cold and loneliness. She looked at Kael, at the solemn promise in his eyes. The humming in her chest grew stronger, a resonant chord of rightness. She took one step away from the cabin door, then another. She walked to his side. Together, they moved through the moonlit forest, not toward the bustling heart of the pack, but along a hidden path that wound up the mountainside. They arrived at a secluded stone lodge, built into the cliff face overlooking the entire territory, the Alpha King's private sanctuary. He led her inside to a spacious room where a fire already crackled in a great hearth. "You will be safe here. No one will disturb you." He stood awkwardly for a moment, a king unsure of his own palace. "I must go. There are things I must address. The council." The weight of his crown settled visibly back onto his shoulders. The man who had looked at her with such soft recognition was being swallowed by the Alpha King. Lyra reached out, her fingers briefly brushing the back of his hand. A silent thank you. A spark, sharp and sweet, jumped between their skin. Kael's breath hitched. He looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes, his own swirling with a torrent of emotion. Duty, desire, frustration, protectiveness. "Rest," he said, his voice rough. "I will return after dawn." He left, closing the heavy oak door softly behind him. Lyra stood alone in the magnificent room, the weight of the fine cloak and the profound silence pressing in on her. She walked to the window, looking out at the kingdom sprawled below, glittering under the strange, potent moon. She was in the Alpha King's home. He called her his mate, and tomorrow an entire world would rise up to deny it. Her silent wolf stirred again, and this time, deep within the void where her voice should have been, Lyra felt the faintest tremor, not a sound, but a feeling, a single clear emotion that was not her own. It was Kael's, flowing back to her through the nascent bond. It was resolve, as solid and unyielding as stone. He would fight for her. The question that coiled in her soul, cold and serpentine, was, what would that fight cost them both? Chapter 3. The Council of Stones. Dawn arrived not with gentle light, but with a cold gray hostility that seeped into the stones of the great hall. The Council of Stones was assembled, a semicircle of ancient, grim-faced elders seated on hewn rock benches. At the center, on a throne of black obsidian, sat Alpha King Kael. His expression was carved from the same unreadable stone. Lyra stood beside him, as he had instructed. She wore a simple gray dress, feeling like a ghost among the vivid fur-lined robes of the elders. Her very presence in this sacred space was a violation in their eyes. She could feel the heat of their collective scorn. Elder Bram spoke first, his voice dripping with poisoned courtesy. "My king, we gather under a cloud of confusion. The New Year's moon worked a deep magic, yes, but magic can be deceptive. It can prey on a noble heart's desire for connection and twist it into something unfortunate." The king's finger tapped once slowly on the arm of his throne. "Are you suggesting the moon goddess herself would play such a cruel trick upon her chosen alpha, Elder Bram? Are you calling the mate bond a lie?" A hushed murmur traveled around the circle. To question the mate bond was to question the foundation of their entire world. Elder Nera, a she-wolf with eyes like flint, leaned forward. "We question not the goddess, but the vessel. The outcast carries the silence. Her wolf is broken. A broken mate cannot strengthen a king. She can only weaken him. She cannot howl to rally the pack. She cannot mind-link to warn of danger. She is a vulnerability your enemies will exploit without mercy." Each word was a precise, clinical blow. Lyra flinched, wrapping her arms around her. They were right. Everything they said was true. She was a flaw. Kael's voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. "Her name is Lyra. You will use it." The command startled them into silence. He arose from his throne, his stature dominating the hall. "For 10 years she has lived on our borders, forgotten, shunned. Did any of you ever seek to understand her silence, to heal it,
Or did you simply find it convenient to label it a curse and look away? He paced before them, his gaze burning into each elder in turn. The moon's magic did not create the bond. It tore away the veil that blinded us all, myself included. She has been my mate all along, and we left her in the cold. Elder Bram scoffed. A pretty sentiment, my king, but sentiment does not win wars. It does not maintain order. The pack is already whispering. They are afraid. Their king is bound to an omega, to a silent one.
The pack is already whispering. They are afraid. Their king is bound to an omega, to a silent one. Your strength is now in doubt. Then we'll let them doubt. Kael's roar echoed off the stones, making several elders jump. My strength is not so fragile that it hinges on the voice of my mate. My strength comes from the goddess, from my ancestors, and from my own will. And my will, he said, turning to look directly at Lyra, his voice softening just a fraction, is to honor the bond she has given me. He turned back to the council, his decision final. Lyra is my true mate. She will be treated with the respect and protection that title demands. She will move into the Alpha quarters. She will take her place at my side. This is not a subject for debate. It is the law of our very nature. A heavy, defiant silence filled the hall. The elders exchanged looks of bitter resignation and simmering rebellion. They could not openly defy a mate's decree, but their opposition was a living thing in the room. Kael had won the battle of words, but the war for acceptance had just begun. As Kael led Lyra from the stifling hall, Elder Brahm's final hissed words followed them out into the corridor, meant for Kael's ears alone. You champion a weakness, Kael, and nature has a cruel way of purging weakness. You have not protected her. You have made her the target of every shadow in this kingdom. Once in the private corridor, Kael's shoulders slumped, the mask of unwavering authority cracking for just a moment. He looked down at Lyra, seeing the tears she stubbornly refused to shed glittering in her eyes. I am sorry, he breathed, the words thick with frustration. I am sorry that my claiming you has become a trial. It should have been a joy. Lyra shook her head fiercely. She reached for his hand, turning it over, and with her finger, she carefully traced letters on his palm. Her touch was feather light, but it sent currents of sensation up his arm. She wrote, N-O-T-U-R-F-A-U-L-T. He stared at the invisible words on his skin, then curled his fingers gently around hers, holding her hand in a warm, strong grasp. It is my fault, he insisted. I am the king. The burden is mine to bear, but I will bear it, Lyra, I swear to you. He led her toward their quarters. The pack territory spread below them, vast and beautiful, and suddenly filled with invisible threats. Kael had defied his counsel for her. He had staked his authority on a bond with a woman who could not speak a word in her own defense. The warmth of his hand in hers was the only real thing in a world that felt like it was tilting on its axis, and in the deep forests beyond the safe borders, stirred by the strange pulses of the New Year's moon and the sudden, shocking vulnerability of the mighty Silvermane King, old enemies began to lift their heads. They had caught the scent of discord, and on the wind they carried a new, chilling whisper. The king's silent meat was the key to his downfall. Chapter 4. Whispers in the shadows. Life in the Alpha's lodge was a gilded cage. Lyra had rooms of stunning beauty, furs softer than cloud, food so rich it felt like a dream. But the silence here was different. It was a watchful, judgmental silence, broken only by the hushed, hurried footsteps of the few servants Kael had personally vetted. They were polite, but their eyes slid away from hers. Fear, not respect, guided their actions. Kael
Kael was a storm of constant activity, between managing the pack's winter reserves, border patrols, and containing the political fallout from their bonding. He was often gone from dawn until deep into the night. Their moments together were fleeting islands of calm in a turbulent sea. He would return, weariness etched into the lines of his face, and simply sit with her by the fire. Sometimes he would speak, telling her of his day, the petty grievances of the elders, the concerns about the frozen river. Other times they would sit in a communion of quiet, the bond between them a living, breathing thing in the space. It was during these silences that Lyra learned to speak, not with words, but with the bond. She would pour her gratitude toward him, a warm, steady pulse. He would respond with a wave of reassurance or a flicker of amusement at something Brahm had said. It was crude, instinctive, but it was more profound than any conversation she had ever had. Yet the outside world was not so kind. The first direct attack came not from an elder, but from the pack itself. Lyra had ventured into the medicinal garden behind the lodge, seeking the familiar comfort of herbs. That's where she found them. 3 young she-wolves, daughters of high-ranking warriors, stood blocking the path. The tallest, a beautiful, cruel-faced girl named Alara, smirked. "Look, the mute queen is tending her weeds. Do you communicate with them through the dirt? Is that how you bewitched our king?" Her friends giggled, a sharp, nasty sound. Lyra straightened, clutching her basket, her heart pounding. She tried to walk around them, but Alara shifted, blocking her way. "He pities you, you know. That's all this is. A great king's charity project. Soon he'll see you for the barren, silent creature you are, and cast you back to your hovel." The words were meant to wound, and they did. They sliced into old scars. But then something new happened. A surge of heat, of pure protective fury erupted in Lyra's chest. It wasn't her own. It was Kael's. Down the bond she felt a roar of anger so potent it vibrated in her bones. He had felt her distress. Moments later, a shadow fell over the garden. Kael stood at the entrance, having run from his study. His eyes were pure wolf, glowing with a feral light. He did not even look at the she-wolves. His gaze was fixed on Lyra, checking for harm. Then, slowly, he turned his head towards Alara. His voice was a low, deadly whisper that froze the very air. "You will kneel." The command was infused with alpha power, an irresistible compulsion. All 3 girls dropped to their knees in the frost, heads bowed, trembling. "You will apologize to your Luna." The title, spoken here now, was a thunderclap. Luna. Alara choked out a terrified, "Forgive me, Luna." Kael took a step forward, his power rolling over them like a physical weight. "If any of you or anyone you know ever disrespects my mate, you will not be exiled. You will face me in the challenge ring. Do you understand the permanence of that?" They understood. A challenge from the Alpha King was a death sentence. They whimpered their assent. "Now get out of my sight." They scrambled away, vanishing into the trees.
Kael was at Lyra's side in an instant, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized had fallen. "I felt your pain," he murmured, his own anger fading into concern. "I will always feel it, and I will always come." Lyra leaned into his touch, the solid reality of him. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its fierce, rapid beat. In her mind, she pushed a single, clear thought down the bond, the strongest one she had ever formed. "My protector." He closed his eyes, absorbing the feeling, a shudder running through him always, he vowed. But that night, as Kael slept fitfully beside her, Lyra lay awake. His public defense had been a show of absolute power. It had also made her a bigger target. The whispers wouldn't stop. They would just go deeper, festering in the shadows, and she had felt something else in the garden just before Kael arrived, a presence, cold, alien, and intensely focused, watching from the deep woods beyond the garden wall. It wasn't a pack wolf. The scent had been wrong, like wet stone and decaying leaves. It was gone as quickly as she'd sensed it, leaving only a creeping dread in its wake. Kael had enemies outside the pack.
And now, because of her, they had a point of entry. She was the weakness. She was the key. And as the moon, now returned to its normal cycle but forever changed in her eyes, shone through the window, Lyra made a silent vow of her own. She would not remain just a burden to be protected. She would find her strength. She had to. Because the shadows were no longer just whispering. They were gathering. Chapter 5. The Echo in the Silence. The incident in the garden changed everything, and yet nothing. Public taunts ceased, but the silence that followed was heavier, laced with a resentment that tasted metallic on the air. Lyra felt it with every step she took outside the lodge. She was the Luna who had forced their mighty alpha to bully young girls. The narrative had twisted, and she was its villain. Driven by a new, desperate resolve, Lyra began to explore the one place where she had always found a sliver of peace, the ancient pack archives. A dusty, cavernous hall deep within the mountain, it was tended by a wizened, nearly blind elder named Orin, who cared more for scrolls than for pack politics. He paid her no mind, and for that she was grateful. Her fingers traced crumbling leather spines and brittle parchment. She sought any mention of the muted wolf, the silent curse. She found only sparse, fearful references. The one who cannot sing with the pack is a ghost among wolves. A broken link weakens the chain. It was all condemnation, no explanation. Frustration was a bitter knot in her throat. She slammed a heavy tome shut, sending a cloud of dust into a sunbeam. Orin, from his desk by the door, chuckled dryly. "Gengar will not make the words speak, child." Startled, she turned. He was looking toward her, his milky eyes seeming to see right through her. "You seek answers about your silence," he stated, not asked. "You look in the wrong places. The pack records only write of what they fear. You must look to what came before the pack." He gestured a gnarled hand toward a shadowed, forgotten arch at the very back of the hall. The oldest cave writings, the ones from when we were not just wolves, but spirits of the mountain. Few can decipher them, fewer dare. Lyra's heart thudded against her ribs. She took a torch from the wall and approached the arch. Beyond it was a narrow, natural cave, its walls not lined with shelves, but covered in paintings and carvings made by long-forgotten hands. The air was cold and smelled of deep earth and time. She raised the torch. The flickering light brought the walls to life. Scenes of giant wolves running under twin moons, of humans and wolves shifting as one. And there, in a secluded corner, a different image. A she-wolf, head thrown back in a howl, but from her muzzle there were no sound waves. Instead, lines radiated inward, toward her heart, where a symbol like a starburst was drawn. Lyra stumbled closer, her breath catching. Beneath the painting, etched in the stone, were glyphs. She could not read them. Despair began to creep in. But as she stared, the strange warmth in her chest, the mate bond, stirred. It hummed, resonating softly. Almost without thought, she placed her palm flat against the cold stone, right over the starburst symbol on the she-wolf. A jolt, like static, shot up her arm, not painful, but illuminating. The glyphs didn't change, but a knowing flashed into her mind, swift and clear as a lightning strike. It was not a voice, it was pure meaning. The howl of the soul, the voice turned inward, not a curse, a vessel. The silence is not emptiness, it is depth. The power does not ride the wind, it pools in the well. Lyra snatched her hand back, staggering. The torch wavered. The understanding lingered, terrifying and magnificent. Her silence wasn't a flaw, it was a different kind of vessel. For what? "What did you see, child?" Orin's voice echoed softly from the archway. She turned, her eyes wide, her whole body trembling. She pointed to the painting, to her own chest, her mouth open in a silent cry of confusion and awe. Orin's blind eyes seemed to see the truth on her face. He nodded slowly. "The old ways remember what the new have forgotten. Your path is not the pack's path, but it is a path nonetheless." He turned to leave, then paused. "Tell your king, what stirs in the dark places of the world cares nothing about painted walls. It smells the power you do not yet know you hold." That night, as Kael returned, he found her not by the fire, but standing at the window, clutching her shawl tightly. The turmoil inside her was a storm he felt the moment he crossed the threshold. "Lyra?" He was beside her instantly, turning her to face him. Her eyes were huge, filled with a fear and wonder he had never seen. What happened? She was frantic. She grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the door, back toward the archives. He followed, questions dying on his lips at her urgency. In the cave, she dragged him before the painting. She pointed to the silent she-wolf, to the inward lines, to the starburst. Then she placed her hand over her own heart, where the bond pulsed warm and strong, and looked at him with desperate, imploring eyes. Kael stared at the ancient art, then down at her. He was a warrior, a strategist. He understood symbols of power. The realization dawned on him, slow and staggering. It's not a curse. It's a focusing symbol. The howl directed inward. He looked from the wall to her, his mind making connections with terrifying speed.
The elders, they fear what they don't understand. They called it a weakness because it wasn't a strength they recognized. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as she trembled. "This changes everything, Lyra. This is a secret, a powerful one. We must guard it." But Lyra was shaking her head. She pulled back and pointed a trembling finger toward the dark woods beyond the mountain, the direction from which she had felt that cold, watching presence. Then she placed her hand over his heart and her own, miming a connection, and then made a slicing motion across her throat. The message was horrifyingly clear. They know, the enemies in the shadows. They know about this power, and they want to sever our bond to get to it. Kael's face hardened into a mask of grim determination. The political squabbles of his council faded into insignificance. This was no longer about pack acceptance. This was about an ancient power sleeping in his mate, and predators circling in the dark, drawn to its scent. He had to protect her, but more than that, he had to help her understand what she was, before their enemies did. Chapter 6. The Shadow's Proposal. The first snows began to fall in earnest, blanketing the territory in a deceptive quiet. Kael doubled the border patrols, his orders terse and urgent. He trusted his head warrior, Gareth, a man of few words and unwavering loyalty, with the truth. Something is probing our defenses. It's not rogue wolves. The scent is wrong. Lyra, armed with the cryptic knowledge from the cave, felt a new kind of restlessness. The depth the glyphs spoke of was a mystery. She spent hours in meditation, trying to listen to the silence within, but all she found was her own frantic heartbeat and the constant, comforting hum of the mate bond. It was like staring into a well and seeing only her own reflection. Her attempts to connect with the pack in traditional ways were disastrous. She attended a howling ceremony under the half-moon, standing beside Kael on the Howling Ridge. As the pack raised their voices in a unified, beautiful song of unity and territory, the pressure of their combined sound was a physical agony. It wasn't just that she couldn't join. It felt like their howls were stones thrown into her quiet pool, churning up mud and confusion. She swayed, a sharp pain lancing through her skull. Kael felt her distress instantly through the bond and wrapped a steadying arm around her, cutting the ceremony short with a curt command. The pack's disapproval was a cold gust as they dispersed. Later, in their chambers, Kael massaged her temples, his touch gentle. "It's too much for you," he murmured, guilt lacing his words. "I should not have asked you to go." She shook her head, taking his hand. She wrote on his palm, NOTYOURFAULT, MYWAYISDIFFERENT. He sighed.
pulling her close, resting his chin on her head. "I just wish I knew what your way is, how to help you find it." The answer came from the last place they expected. A week later, a lone figure approached the main gate at twilight. He was tall, wrapped in gray traveler's robes, his hood pulled low. He carried no weapon, but an air of serene, unshakable power radiated from him. The guards, tense and ready, challenged him. "I seek an audience with Alpha King Kael and his Luna Lyra. I am Theron of the Stone-Tooth Pack. I bring knowledge concerning the Silent One." The name sent a ripple of shock through the guards. The Stone-Tooth Pack were distant neighbors, mysterious and reclusive, dwelling in the highest, most inaccessible peaks. They were known as keepers of old lore, and they almost never descended to the lowlands. Kael received him in the Great Hall, Lyra at his side, Gareth standing like a sentinel behind the throne. The stranger pushed back his hood, revealing a face that was both ageless and ancient, with eyes the color of smoked quartz. His gaze went straight to Lyra, not with judgment, but with a profound, assessing curiosity. "Alpha King, Luna, thank you for receiving me. I have traveled far, drawn by the echoes of the New Year's moon and the unique shift in the pack's harmony." "You speak of my mate," Kael said, his tone guarded, a low, warning rumble in his chest. "You speak of a phenomenon," Theron corrected softly. "The muted wolf is a tale told by many packs as a warning, but in the oldest songs of my people, it is spoken of differently. We call it the heart singer." Lyra's breath hitched. Heart singer. The words resonated with the glyphs in the cave. Kael leaned forward. "Explain." "The power of a wolf is in its voice, its howl, to connect and command. But for 1 in 10,000, the voice turns inward. The power does not project. It amplifies. It deepens. It becomes a force not of the throat, but of the spirit. A heart singer does not howl to the pack. She feels the pack. She can sense the truth in a heartbeat, the lie in a breath. Her bond," he gestured between Kael and Lyra, "is not a simple link, it is a conduit. In time, her focused silence could strengthen your alpha power tenfold, Kael, or, if severed, could cripple it completely." The hall was dead silent. Gareth's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Kael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. The enemy's interest was now horrifically clear. "Why are you telling us this?" Kael demanded. "Because the stirring in the dark knows this lore as well," Theron said, his calm finally cracking with a sliver of urgency. "They are not mere rogues. They are the Shadowfang, a cult that thrives on consuming unique wolf powers. They believe by severing a bond as potent as yours and consuming the heart of a heart singer, they can steal that inward-focused strength. They have been searching for one for generations. The New Year's moon was a beacon, lighting her up for them as it did for you." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. Consuming the heart. The cold presence in the garden hadn't just been watching, it had been hungry. "How do we stop them?" Kael's voice was steel. "You cannot by strength of arms alone. They move like mist. You must strengthen the bond from within. Lyra must learn to wield her silence not as a void, but as a shield, as a weapon." Theron turned fully to her now. "I can guide you, but you must come to the Stone-Tooth Peaks. The training requires the sacred silence of the high glaciers, away from the cacophony of a large pack. It is the only way." "Absolutely not," Kael growled, standing. "You expect me to send my mate, my greatest vulnerability, into the mountains with a stranger?"
Saren met his glare unflinchingly. I expect you to trust the goddess who forged your bond. I offer no guarantee of safety, only a chance at power. Her power. To remain here is to be a static target. The Shadowfang will come, and they will lay siege to your kingdom to get to her. How many of your pack will die defending a secret they don't even understand? The question hung in the air, brutal and unanswerable. Kael looked at Lyra, seeing the terror in her eyes, but also, beneath it, a fierce, dawning determination. She stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. She looked at Theron, then back at Kael. Slowly, deliberately, she nodded. She was willing to go. Kael's heart felt like it was being torn in two. The king knew the strategist's cold logic agreed with Theron. The mate wanted to lock her in the deepest vault and never let her go. He reached for her, his hand cupping her cheek. The bond surged between them, a torrent of fear, love, and desperate hope. "If she goes," Kael said, his voice raw, "I send Gareth and my most trusted warriors with her." "That is acceptable," Theron nodded. "We leave at first light. Every moment we delay brings the shadow closer." That night, in their chamber, there were no words, written or felt. There was only the desperate, clinging closeness of two souls facing a chasm. Kael held her as if he could imprint her into his very skin, his face buried in her hair. Lyra memorized the feel of his heartbeat against her palm, the scent of his skin, the solid strength of him. She was leaving the only true shelter she had ever known, not for exile this time, but for a purpose more terrifying than solitude. She was going to learn to be the weapon they needed her to be, and she prayed to the moon goddess that she would be strong enough and fast enough before the shadows closed in for the kill. Chapter 7. The Ascent to Silence. The journey to the Stone-Tooth Peaks was a passage into another world. The dense, familiar forests of the Silvermane territory gave way to skeletal pines, then to bare, wind-scoured rock. The air grew thin and sharp, carrying a silence so profound it had a weight of its own. Lyra, wrapped in furs against the biting cold, felt the constant, low-grade noise of the pack, the mental chatter, the emotional static, finally begin to fade away. It was like a pressure she hadn't known she was carrying was slowly being lifted from her mind. Gareth and 4 elite warriors formed a protective ring around her and Theron, their eyes constantly scanning the treacherous slopes. They trusted their alpha's orders, but their skepticism of the enigmatic guide was a tangible thing. Theron, however, moved with an unerring grace, as if the mountain itself made way for him. After 3 days of arduous climbing, they arrived. It was not a village, but a series of natural caverns and ledges carved into the face of a sheer glacier. The Stone-Tooth Pack were few in number, their forms lean and hardy, their eyes holding the same quiet depth as Theron's. They watched Lyra with open curiosity, but none approached. Here, silence was not a curse, it was a way of life. Theron led Lyra to a cavern open on one side to a dizzying vista of endless peaks. The only sound was the mournful wind. "This is the listening place." His voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried perfectly. "Your pack's world is built on sound. Ours is built on what lies beneath it. You have spent a lifetime trying to hear a howl that will never come. Now you must try to hear the something else." He had her sit on a smooth, cold stone. "Close your eyes. Do not try to listen with your ears. Feel the bond to your mate." That was easy. It was a golden, thrumming cord in her chest, stretching back over the miles to Kael. She could feel his worry, his constant vigilance, a dull ache of absence. "Good," murmured Theron. "Now, instead of just feeling his emotions, try to send along that cord. Not a word, a single, pure image." Lyra concentrated, thinking of the fire in their hearth. She pushed the memory of its light and warmth down the bond with all her might. Nothing seemed to happen. "You are shouting in a library," Theron chided gently. "The bond is not for force, it is for resonance. Be the still water, not the crashing wave. Try again. Send him the feeling of this wind on your face, the cold,
the clarity. Frustration bubbled in her. This was impossible, but she breathed in the icy air, focused on the sensation, and this time she simply released it, like letting a feather drift from her palm. In the Silvermane Lodge, Kael was in a tense council meeting, arguing over grain stores. Suddenly, a phantom chill brushed his cheek. He felt a vast, open sky, a sensation of breathtaking height and solitude. It was so vivid he flinched, cutting off Elder Bram mid-sentence. Lyra! The feeling was accompanied by a crystal-clear sense of focus, of purpose. It was her, but it was more than just emotion. It was a landscape of feeling. For the first time, she had sent him something specific, something beyond the fog of shared sentiment. A fierce, proud joy surged through him, momentarily eclipsing his fear. Back in the cavern, Theron nodded. He felt it. I see it in your face. That is the beginning. The heart singer does not broadcast. It transmits with perfect fidelity. Now turn inward. The next lessons were harder. Theron taught her to map the internal soundscape of her own soul. The constant hum of the mate bond was one note. The echoing echo of the pack's dissonance was another. Her own fear was a cold, discordant jangle. Her determination was a steady drumbeat. Your power lies in this internal orchestra, he explained. You can mute one instrument, amplify another. You can, in theory, project that internal state onto others, calm a raging heart, amplify a seed of doubt in an enemy. Or, his voice grew grave, you can shield. You can create a sphere of perfect resonant silence around your own mind, and perhaps extend it to another. A shield no mere howl can break. The days blurred into a routine of meditation, exhausting mental exercises, and bone-deep cold. Lyra missed Kael with a physical pain, but the bond was their lifeline. At night, by the weak fire in her small cave, she would pour her loneliness and her small victories down the connection, and waves of his love, pride, and unwavering faith would return to her, warmer than any flames. One evening, as the sun died in a blaze of violet and gold behind the peaks, Theron sat beside her. You progress, but time is a river flowing swiftly to a cliff. The Shadowfang does not sleep. You must learn the shield before the next moon full. It is when their power and their hunger will peak.
Lyra looked at him, her eyes asking the question she couldn't voice. Yes, he said, answering the unspoken. To shield your mate, you must first be able to shield yourself, to create a fortress in your mind where no external influence can enter. It is the ultimate expression of your inward focus. We begin at dawn. That night, Lyra's dreams were not of silence, but of a creeping, insidious noise, a scraping of claws on stone, a hungry, voiceless whispering that sought the edges of her mind. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. In the vast, frozen silence of the stone-tooth peaks, she could almost hear the shadows, drawing closer. Chapter 8. The Cracks in the Kingdom. While Lyra ascended into silence, Kael descended into a different kind of storm. The pack was fracturing. The absence of their Luna, whispered to be a secret mission, did nothing to quell the rumors. Elder Bram and his factions spread a new, more insidious poison, that the king, bewitched by the mute, had sent her away to hide her inadequacy, or worse, to seek a cure from witches. See how he paces like a caged beast, hissed Bram to a group of gathered warriors in the training yard. His bond is a sickness. It weakens his focus. He cares more for his broken mate than for the stability of our borders. Kael, from his study window, saw the huddled group, felt the shift in loyalty like a change in the wind. His jaw tightened. He was trying to govern, to prepare defenses based on Theron's warnings, but every move was met with resistance disguised as caution. The only solid ground was Gareth's daily mind link from the peaks, a terse report. She is safe. She is learning. Theron speaks truth.
It was the thin, strong thread holding Kael's sanity together. Then the first attack came, not on the peaks, but on the outermost Silvermane settlement, a logging camp. It was over by dawn. The guards were found not torn apart, but empty. Their bodies were cold, unharmed, but their eyes were vacant, their minds shattered. There was no scent of rogue wolf, no sign of struggle, just a pervasive, lingering smell of wet stone and decay, and a profound, unnatural silence in a place that should have been full of the sounds of life. Kael stood amidst the horror. The reports of the survivors chilled his blood. They came from the mist, Alpha. No howls, no snarls. It was like a silence that swallowed sound, then a pressure in the head, and then nothing. The Shadow Fang. They were here, and they were testing his defenses, probing for weakness, and demonstrating a power that was not of tooth and claw, but of spirit and mind. He returned to the lodge, his rage a cold, deadly inferno. He summoned the full council. "The enemy is at our door," he stated, his voice flat. "They do not fight as we do. They attack the mind. The logging camp was a message. We are vulnerable." Elder Nara stood, her face pale. "What enemy, Kael? We saw no enemy, only dead men with confused minds. This reeks of witchcraft, not war. And who among us has recently consorted with mystics and keepers of odd lore?" snarled Brahm, his implication clear. "You sent your mate to the mountains, and now this psychic plague descends upon us. Coincidence?" Kael's controls snapped. Alpha power erupted from him, a crushing wave of dominance that forced every elder to their knees, gasping. "Enough!" he roared, the windows rattling. "My mate is in the mountains training to defend this pack from the very evil that now stains our land. While you snipe and whisper, she is learning to fight a battle you are too blind to even see. The next person who speaks her name with disdain will join the shadows permanently." He released the pressure, leaving them coughing and shaken. "Double the patrols. No one travels alone. Posts are to be manned in pairs, mind-linked at all times. We fight silence with connection." Dismissed. The elders fled, cowed but not convinced. Kael was left alone in the suddenly vast hall, the weight of his crown threatening to crush his spine. He closed his eyes, reaching desperately down the bond. He didn't send words or images. He sent a surge of pure need, of loneliness, of the crushing burden of a king defending a kingdom that was trying to devour itself from within. Miles away, in the listening place, Lyra was attempting the shield. She had built a wall of mental silence in her mind, but it was fragile, full of cracks where her own fears leaked through. Suddenly, Kael's emotional torrent hit her, a blast of isolation, duty, and fierce protective love, all twisted into agony. Her fragile shield shattered. The onslaught of his pain was worse than any of her own. She cried out, a raw, soundless gasp, and fell to her knees. Farron was at her side in an instant. "His pain is a weapon against you if you cannot separate it from your own," he said urgently. "You must feel it, Lyra, but you must not drown in it. The shield is not a wall against your mate. It is a filter. It is what will allow you to stand beside him in the storm without being swept away." Again. Tears of frustration and shared pain froze on her cheeks, but she remembered the vacant eyes of the loggers in Kael's memory share. She felt the vast, hungry silence of the Shadowfang pressing on his borders. Her mate was under siege, and her training was the only artillery that could match this strange enemy. She wiped her face, took a shuddering breath, and closed her eyes once more. This time, she didn't try to block Kael's emotions. She let them flow into her, through her, but visualized them passing through a crystal lens, felt, understood, but not absorbed. The core of her own mind, her own purpose, remained still and clear in the center. A small, perfect sphere of calm formed within the chaos. It held for 3 breaths, then 5. Theron let out a slow sigh. Good. Now, while holding that center, reach out to him. Send him not your fear, but your stillness. Lyra, holding her fragile inner citadel, grasped the bond. She sent the image of the mountain peak under the steady stars, unmoving, eternal, silent not with emptiness, but with immense poised strength. In his study, Kael was poring over maps, his mind a cyclone of strategies and dread. Then, like a balm, it came, a feeling of impossible solidity, a profound, anchoring quiet. It didn't erase his problems, but it placed him for a moment above them. He saw in his mind's eye Lyra not as a victim to protect, but as a pillar to lean on. He took a deep, cleansing breath, the first in days. The bond hummed between them, no longer just a line of communication, but a bridge of mutual strength. The king and the heartsinger were learning to fight as one. But in the dark forest, the things that smelled of wet stone felt the shift in the psychic winds. Their whispered hunger grew more urgent.
The Luna was awakening. The time to harvest her heart was drawing near. Chapter 9. The Glacial Test. The shield was no longer a theory, but a fragile, hard-won reality. Lyra could hold the sphere of inner silence for longer each day, a tiny, potent sun glowing in the center of her being. Yet Theron was not satisfied. "The shield is a defense for you alone," he said one bitter morning, the glacier groaning around them. "A heartsinger's true power is in resonance, in influence. To protect your mate and your pack, you must learn to extend your focus. You must learn to harmonize." He led her to the very edge of the listening place, where a natural stone bridge arched over a bottomless crevice. The wind here was a screaming demon, threatening to pluck thought from mind. "Beneath the noise there is a rhythm," Theron yelled over the gale. "The mountain's breath. Find it. Match your inner silence to its pulse. Then try to bend it." It sounded like madness. Lyra knelt, pressing her palms to the frozen rock. She dropped into her shielded core, letting the howling wind become a distant roar. Deeper, past the fear of the fall, past the cold. There, a vibration, slow, immense, timeless, the deep geological heartbeat of the mountain itself. She focused her will, imagining her silent core vibrating at the same frequency. A strange thing happened. The screaming wind seemed to soften, not in reality, but in her perception, as if she had tuned it out by tuning herself in. "Good." Theron's voice reached her, clear now, despite the storm. "Now the crevice, send that pulse down, not to silence it, to listen to its silence." Lyra directed her focused attention downward into the blue-black void. She expected nothing, but instead of emptiness, she felt a presence, a cold, ancient, and utterly alien consciousness. It was not malevolent, it was simply other, the sleeping spirit of the glacier. Her probe brushed against it, and a wave of pure, crystalline cold shot back up the connection, not into her ears, but into her soul. It was the feeling of millennia of slow, relentless grinding, of impossible wait, of patience that made her own life seem like the blink of an eye. She recoiled, breaking the connection, gasping for breath as if she'd been plunged into icy water. Theron steadied her. "You see, the world is full of songs that are not howls. To harmonize is to understand them. Now, a living test." He called over one of the stone-tooth warriors, a young male named Rokan, who had been watching her training with keen interest.
Rokan is agitated. His mate is due to pup soon. He fears the climb to the birthing caves. Calm him, not with words, with resonance. Rokan stood before her, his anxiety a visible tremor in his hands, a sour scent of worry rolling off him. Lyra panicked. How could she possibly affect another's emotions? She looked into his eyes, seeing the fear there. She remembered the feeling of Kael's pain, and how she had learned to let it flow through her without breaking her center. She closed her eyes, found her silent core, and then, instead of projecting, she opened it. She let Rokan's fear wash against her shield, and she reflected back not the fear, but the steady mountain's pulse she had just harmonized with. She imagined the deep, patient stability of stone, of the eternal peaks under a starlit sky, and she pushed that feeling gently toward him. Rokan's breathing hitched. His shoulders, which had been hunched near his ears, slowly lowered. The wild look in his eyes softened into something more like awe. He blinked, looking at Lyra as if seeing her for the first time, and gave a slow, reverent nod. The anxiety hadn't vanished, but it was now grounded, manageable. Theron's smile was genuine. You are a quick study, Heartsinger. This is the power your enemies fear, not to shatter minds, but to fortify them, to bring discord into harmony. But remember, Theron's smile faded. The opposite is also true. You can find the discord in a harmonious mind and amplify it. The lesson was a victory, but it left Lyra chilled. The power was intoxicating and terrifying. That night, Gareth's mind link to Kael was intercepted by a sudden, powerful surge from Lyra herself. It wasn't words, but a complex wave of sensation. The profound cold of the glacier's spirit, the heady success of calming Rokan, and underneath it all, a deep burgeoning fear of the weapon she was becoming. In his lodge, Kael received the transmission, a mosaic of his mate's experience. He felt her growing power, and it filled him with pride. But he also felt her terror, and it ignited a fresh, more potent fear in him. She was changing, evolving into something magnificent and strange, and he was not there to guide her. The distance between them felt like a physical ache, a canyon carved by duty and shadow. His thoughts were interrupted by a frantic knock. A border scout, bloodied and trembling, stumbled in. Alpha, the Western Pass, a full patrol. They're like the loggers, empty. But this time we saw them, just shadows in the mist, with eyes that glowed like cold embers. They took the bodies, Kael. They took the empty bodies. The Shadowfang was no longer just probing, they were harvesting, and the next full moon, the peak of their power, was only nights away. The glacial test was over. The real war was about to begin.
Lyra reached out with her new senses, not to harmonize, but to listen for the discordant note in the symphony of Theron's spirit. It was there, a faint, frozen thread of perpetual grief buried deep under layers of wisdom and calm. She barely brushed against it with her focus, and Theron, the unflappable sage, gasped as if struck, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "I'm sorry," Lyra's thoughts screamed down the bond to Kael, reflexively seeking absolution, even as she pulled back, horrified at her own ability. "It is necessary," Theron rasped, recovering. "You see its power, and you see its cost. It wounds the wielder as well, for to touch such darkness is to be stained by it. The Shadowfang revels in this stain. You must not." The lesson left her feeling filthy, her inner silence feeling fragile and contaminated. That evening, as she tried to cleanse herself with the simple rhythm of her breathing, a new presence brushed against the outermost edges of her awareness. It was not the ancient cold of the glacier, nor the warm hum of her bond with Kael. It was a multitude of hungry, whispering voids, a chorus of dissonance. It was faint, still far away in the lowlands, but it was moving, gathering. It felt like a psychic tide of rot and craving, and at its center, a single dominant will, sharp, intelligent, and focused entirely on her. She flung her awareness toward Kael in a panic. The image she sent was not a picture, but a raw sense of that approaching tide, the psychic scent of the Shadowfang on the move. In the Silvermane war room, Kael jolted upright from his maps. He didn't just understand the warning, he felt the greasy, invasive cold of it. He slammed his fist on the table. They're coming. Lyra has sensed them. Sound the battle howl. Every warrior to the outer wall. Now. The great alarm howl rose over the territory, not a song of unity this time, but a blade-sharp cry of impending doom. The pack, fractious and fearful, was galvanized by the primal call. For a moment, the whispers stilled, replaced by the grim purpose of survival. Kael mind-linked to Gareth, the connection thin over the distance, but clear. The shadow moves. They will come for the pack to draw her, or for the peaks to take her. You must bring her home, now, not tomorrow, tonight. The full moon rises in a few hours. That is when they will strike. In the peaks, Gareth received the order. He turned to Theron. We leave, now. Theron looked at Lyra, who was pale but resolute, her eyes holding a new, hard-won depth. She is not ready, but she is out of time. The final test will not be in a cave. It will be under the open, bloody moon. The descent was a frantic, dangerous rush in the growing twilight. Lyra's senses, now painfully awake, were bombarded. The approaching dissonance of the Shadowfang was a drumbeat in her skull, growing louder. The fear and fury of her Silvermane pack was a jagged scream on the wind. And Kael was a blazing star of defiant protectiveness, but around him she could feel the hairline fractures in his pack's unity, the doubts, the fears Bram had planted. They were weaknesses the Shadowfang could exploit. As they reached the tree line of the Silvermane territory, the first sliver of the full moon breached the horizon, glowing with an ominous, bloody hue. The whispering in Lyra's mind swelled into a deafening, silent roar. They were here. From the shadows of the ancient pines, figures detached themselves. They were not wolves nor men, but something in between. Cloaked in darkness, their movements unnaturally fluid, their eyes pits of swirling, hungry blackness. They made no sound. The air around them died, absorbing all noise, creating pockets of utter void. The lead figure, taller than the rest, stepped forward. Its gaze locked onto Lyra, and a voice spoke directly into her mind, slick and cold as oil. Heart singer, we have come for the song in your silence. We will feast on the power of your bond, and your king will watch, empty and broken, before he joins you in the void. The battle for the soul of the Silvermane kingdom had begun, and Lyra stood in the no-man's land between the howling pack at her back and the howling abyss before her, her silent wolf rising within, not with a sound, but with a resonance that would either save them all or shatter everything. Chapter 11. The Silent Battlefield. The world fractured into a nightmare of silent motion. The Shadowfang cultists flowed forward like living ink, their silence more terrifying than any war cry. Gareth and his warriors met the charge with guttural snarls and the sharp ring of steel, the sounds bizarrely muted, swallowed by the cultists' aura of void. Lyra stood frozen for a heartbeat, the cold, oily voice of the leader still slithering in her mind. Then Theron's hand was on her shoulder, his voice a sharp, clear bell in the psychic din. Your shield, Lyra, now. Do not let their dissonance in. She slammed her eyes shut, finding her center with a desperation born of terror. The sphere of inner silence snapped into place, a fragile glass globe in a hurricane. The cultist's projected aura of nullity crashed against it, a pressure that sought to crack her sanity, to turn her own mind into an echo chamber of their hunger. She felt it, a greasy, insistent probing, but her shield held. The silence she had cultivated was not an emptiness, it was a fortified space, and their void could not consume it. "Good," Theron yelled, physically shoving a cultist who got too close. "Now the bond, Lyra, link to your alpha. You are his eyes in this blindness." Lyra reached for Kael. The bond was a tumult of battle fury, strategy, and sharp spikes of alarm as his warriors fought an enemy that dissolved into mist and reformed. She poured her perception down the link, not just what she saw, but what she felt. The locations of the cultists, not by sight, but by the cold, sucking voids they created in the world's soundscape. She sensed one coiling behind a warrior about to strike. She sent a pure pulse of warning. In the thick of the battle at the outer wall, Kael, in his giant black wolf form, was a whirlwind of fang and fury. Suddenly, a clear, urgent image from Lyra flashed in his mind, the exact position of a cultist rising behind his beta. He didn't question it. He pivoted and lunged, his massive jaws closing on shadowy substance, dispersing it with a snarl. The beta, Marcus, flashed him a stunned gratitude. Lyra was no longer just a liability, she was their radar in a psychic storm. But the leader of the Shadowfang, the one who had spoken, was focused solely on her. He weaved through the battle untouched, his eyes fixed on Lyra. He raised a hand, and a concentrated spear of dissonance lanced towards her. It wasn't a general aura this time, it was a targeted attack, aimed at the bond itself. It sought to find the harmony between her and Kael and twist it into a feedback loop of agony. Lyra felt it coming, a screaming wrongness in the air. Instinctively, she didn't just raise her shield, she changed its resonance. Thinking of the mountain's pulse, she tuned her defense to the steady, immutable rhythm of stone. The dissonant spear struck and shattered, its energy dissipating like a wave against a cliff. The leader recoiled, a hiss of surprise escaping his lips. Farron, fighting beside her, grunted in approval. "You adapt. Now you must fight back. You must harmonize the battlefield. Give your pack a focal point." Fight back? How? She looked at the Silvermane warriors. Their courage was fierce, but it was laced with confusion and fear. They were fighting ghosts. She saw Marcus falter, his doubt a sour note in the chaos. She remembered calming Roken. This was the same, but on a scale that made her soul tremble. She took a deep breath, anchoring herself in her shield. Then she opened herself not to the enemy's void, but to the song of her pack. She felt their individual threads of fear, rage, and loyalty. Instead of being overwhelmed, she began to hum the mountain's pulse within her core, and she projected it, not as a command, but as an offering, a foundation, a rhythm of unyielding strength to sink their hearts to. It washed over the nearest warriors first, Marcus, his doubt melting into renewed resolve, Gareth, his movements becoming more precise, less frantic. The effect rippled out, a calming, strengthening wave pushing back against the suffocating silence. The pack's howls, which had been desperate, began to harmonize, gaining a cohesive, defiant power. They were no longer fighting in isolated pockets of terror. They were a unified choir against the silence. The Shadowfang leader shrieked in rage, a sound that was a physical pain in the mind. His plan was unraveling. The Heartsinger was not a passive prize. She was an active conductor, turning his weapon of silence against him. He gathered his power, focusing all his malice, all the stolen dissonance of his followers into a single, crushing blast, aimed directly at Lyra's heart, intending to flatline her power forever. Kael, across the battlefield, felt the buildup like a tidal wave of ice. He saw the cult leader raise both hands, darkness coalescing.
With a roar that finally pierced the unnatural quiet, he abandoned his own fight and charged, a black bolt of pure protective fury. He wouldn't make it in time. Lyra saw the attack coming. She saw Kael charging, and in that split second she knew her shield might not hold. So she did the only thing she could think of. She dropped her shield entirely. She opened herself completely to the bond with Kael. She didn't just open it, she funneled all her focus, all her love, all her newfound power into that single golden connection. She became a lens, concentrating the harmonizing pulse of the mountain, the defiant song of the pack, and the sheer, blinding force of her own spirit, and she fired it down the bond, straight into Kael's heart as he leapt. The cult leader's blast of pure dissonance hit her at the same moment. There was no sound, only a flash of blinding white light and a shockwave of pure, resonant energy that emanated not from the cultist, but from the point where Lyra stood. It washed over the clearing in a silent, expanding ring. Where it touched the Shadowfang, they didn't scream. They unraveled, their forms dissolving into wisps of mist that were then scattered by the wind. The leader's attack shattered against the amplified, focused power of the bonded pair. He stared, his dark eyes wide with incomprehension, as his body began to dissipate. His final, fading thought slithered into the void. The song. It was not in her heart alone. It was in the space between them. Then he was gone. The unnatural silence broke. The sounds of the forest rushed back in, the wind, the ragged pants of the warriors, the crackle of distant torches. Lyra swayed on her feet, utterly drained, the world tilting. Before she could fall, Kael was there. He had shifted back, catching her in his arms, his own body trembling with adrenaline and awe. He looked down at her pale face, her eyes fluttering open to meet his. No words passed between them, none were needed. The bond thrummed with a new, profound intensity, humming with the afterglow of shared power and victory. Around them, the pack stood in stunned silence, staring at the empty clearing where a terrifying enemy had simply ceased to exist. They looked at their Luna, cradled in their Alpha's arms, and for the first time, they didn't see a mute outcast, or a weakness, or a curse. They saw the woman whose silent heart had just saved them all. Chapter 12. The Aftermath and the Thaw. The victory was absolute, but the cost was a deep, ringing exhaustion that settled into the very stones of the Silvermane territory. Lyra slept for 2 days, a profound, healing sleep guarded by a Kael who rarely left her side. When she awoke, it was the gentle warmth of the hearth and the solid, reassuring weight of his hand in hers. The change in the pack was a palpable thaw. Where there was suspicion, there was now a wary awe. Where there were whispers, there were hushed conversations full of the resonant wave and the Luna's silent shield. The warriors who had fought at the tree lines spoke of her in a reverence previously reserved only for Kael. She had not howled, but she had conducted the very soul of their pack to victory. Elder Brahm was conspicuously silent. His faction, built on fear and tradition, had crumbled in the face of undeniable, miraculous power. He attended the Victory Council with his head bowed, offering no counsel, his earlier certainty reduced to ashes. It was in this new atmosphere that Kael made his decree. He stood before the entire pack assembled in the main square, Lyra beside him, her hand clasped in his. The Shadowfang is scattered, their leader destroyed. His voice rang out, clear and strong. But they were a symptom of a deeper sickness, our own. We called a gift a curse. We saw depth as emptiness. We exiled one of our own for being different. He looked at Lyra, his gaze softening for all to see. Lyra is not our Luna in spite of her silence. She is our Luna because of it. Her heart hears what our ears cannot. Her strength defends what our claws cannot reach. From this day forward, her silence is sacred. It is the sound of our pack's true strength. He turned to the elders. The old ways that speak only of the outward howl are incomplete. We will add a new tome to our archives, the tome of the Heartsinger, and Theron of the Stonetooth, he gestured to the sage who stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, will help us write it.
This was more than acceptance. It was integration. It was revolution. Later, in the quiet of their chamber, Lyra finally felt safe enough to explore the aftermath within herself. The bond with Kael was different. It wasn't just a line of emotion anymore. It was a wide, deep channel. She could feel the steady pulse of his thoughts if she focused, not in words, but in concepts and feelings. She tested it, sending him a vivid image of the first spring flowers she'd seen peeking through the snow that morning, imbued with a feeling of fragile hope. He looked up from his papers, a slow, true smile spreading across his face, a sight that still made her heart stutter. "It's beautiful," he said aloud, but she also felt the wordless appreciation bloom in his chest, a warmth that echoed her own. But with the new depth came a new sensitivity. As she walked through the packlands with Kael, she could now feel the pack's emotional landscape as a gentle, constant hum. The collective relief, the lingering fear in some, the blooming respect in others. It was not overwhelming, but it was always there, a living tapestry she was now woven into. She also discovered a lesser but vital skill. In the healing chambers, she visited the warriors who had been touched by the Shadowfang's dissonance, those who hadn't been physically wounded, but whose minds were bruised, trapped in anxious loops. She would sit with them, hold their hands, and project the same calming, mountain-steady harmony she had used on the battlefield. She couldn't heal them with a thought, but she could give their minds a still point to grasp, a rhythm to sink to until their own natural resilience took over. The healers watched in amazement as agitated patients grew calm under her silent presence. She was becoming what Theron had named her, the heart of the pack, not its voice, but its pulse. One evening, Theron came to say goodbye. "Your path is your own now, Heartsinger," he said, his quartz eyes wise and kind. "You have mastered the basics in a few weeks that take my people decades. You have a good teacher in your mate," he nodded to Kael, "and a willing student body in your pack. Remember, power is a river. Do not dam it with fear. Do not let it flood you with pride. Guide it. Let it flow where it is needed." As Theron departed for his mountains, Lyra stood with Kael on the balcony, watching the first true sunset of spring paint the sky in gold and rose. The world was not suddenly perfect. The pack's transformation would take time. Shadows might still linger at the edges, but the void within her had been filled, not with sound, but with meaning, with connection. Kael wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. She leaned back into him, their bond singing a quiet, contented duet. She was home, not in a place, but in the space between their two hearts. And for the first time in her life, her silence was not a prison. It was the deepest, most powerful language she knew. Chapter 13, The Fracture in the Song. Spring blossomed across the Silvermane territory, but the thaw revealed not just new life, but old, hidden fissures. Lyra's newfound role as the pack's Heartsinger was accepted, even celebrated by most, but the profound change she represented was a quake whose aftershocks still rumbled. Elder Bram had been quiet but not idle. His power had always flowed through tradition, fear, and control. Lyra's silent, intuitive power, a power that could not be dictated, legislated, or fully understood, was an existential threat to his entire worldview. He watched with growing bitterness as the pack's allegiance subtly shifted from the rigid hierarchy he upheld to the organic, feeling-based connection Lyra fostered. The first true fracture appeared during a territorial dispute with the neighboring Swiftwater pack over fishing rights in the thawing river. Talks grew heated. The Swiftwater Alpha, a brash wolf named Jarek, was all bluster and outward challenge, his power in his loud voice and aggressive posturing. Kael, with Lyra at his side, met him at the border. As Jarek barked demands and threats, Lyra listened with more than her ears. She felt the truth beneath his bluster.
It wasn't greed driving him, but a deep, frantic fear for his pack's starving pups after a harsh winter. His aggression was a mask. She gently tugged Kael's sleeve. When he looked down, she met his eyes and slowly placed a hand over her own, then gestured towards Jarek, her expression of pity, not fear. Kael understood. He changed his tactic. Instead of matching Jarek's volume, he lowered his own. "Your pups are hungry, Jarek. We did not know the winter had been so cruel on your slopes. Let us speak of sharing, not of claiming." Jarek's bluster faltered, disarmed by being seen, not just challenged. The tension dissolved into a workable agreement. It was a stunning diplomatic victory, achieved not by force, but by perception. The pack hailed Kael's wisdom, but Elder Bram saw the source. He cornered Kael later in the empty hall. "You let her guide your tongue in a matter of state, a mute she-wolf interpreting the hearts of other alphas? This is not strength, Kael. It is divination. It is unstable. What if her feeling was wrong? You would have led us to ruin on a whisper." "Her feeling was right," Kael stated coldly. "It saved lives and secured a peaceful border. Her gift is a tool, Bram, one that serves the pack." "It is a crutch," Bram spat, his composure finally breaking. "You are becoming dependent on it, on her. An alpha must rule with his own mind, his own will, not the intuitions of a sensitive." He said the last word like a curse. "You are letting the heart singer's rhythm replace the alpha's beat, and a pack with 2 heartbeats is a pack on the verge of tearing itself apart." He stormed away, leaving Kael with a cold knot of unease in his gut. The words were venomous, but they touched a secret fear Kael had refused to name. After the battle, he had come to rely on Lyra's sense of things. Her perception had become an extension of his own. Was that weakness? Was Bram, in his twisted way, right? He didn't realize Lyra had heard it all. She had been coming to find him, her sensitive awareness drawn to the spike of his distress and Bram's venom. She heard the Elder's words, and she felt the tremor of doubt they sent through Kael's spirit. It was a tiny crack in their bond, a sliver of icy fear. She retreated, hurt and terrified. Was her gift, her very presence, actually causing him to doubt himself? Was she, in her effort to strengthen him, somehow making him weaker in the eyes of his pack? That night, a distance lay between them in their bed, wide as a canyon. Kael was lost in thought, wrestling with Bram's accusation. Lyra was curled away from him, her silent heart aching with a new kind of loneliness. She built her shield, not against an enemy, but against the fear that her mate's doubt inspired in her. For the first time since their bonding, the channel between them felt muffled, clouded by unspoken anxieties. The fracture was subtle. No one else would see it, but the perfect, harmonious song they had conducted together now had a single, faintly discordant note. And in the darkness, seeds of doubt, once planted, began to grow their own cruel roots. Chapter 14. The Poisoned Well. The discord festered in silence. Kael, wanting to prove, to himself as much as to Bram, that he could lead with his own will, began to make decisions without consulting the bond, without seeking Lyra's subtle insight. He threw himself into the mechanical work of kingship, patrol schedules, resource audits, boundary markings. He was efficient, decisive, and emotionally distant. Lyra felt the withdrawal like a physical chill. She interpreted it as confirmation of her fears. He was pulling away because her influence was a problem, so she too withdrew, focusing her energies on her quiet work in the healing chambers and with the pack's young, teaching pups to listen to their own heartbeats, to find calm. She was beloved there, but it was a world apart from Kael's. Their bond, once a roaring river, became a trickle of basic, necessary emotions, a flicker of his fatigue at the end of the day, a pulse of her sadness during a lonely meal. The deep, resonant connection they had forged in battle was dormant. It was into this quiet rift that the poison seeped. A young, ambitious warrior named Corvin, who had once been a vocal supporter of Bram's faction, saw his opportunity. He was clever, with a silver tongue and an eye for weakness. He began to spend time with Kael, flattering him, agreeing with his every independent decision, subtly reinforcing the idea that this was true, uncompromised leadership. The pack respects this, my king, your clear, solitary command. It reminds us of the old, strong ways, before things got complicated. Kael, starved for validation that didn't come through the bond he was now avoiding, nodded absently. He didn't see the gleam in Corvin's eye. Lyra, with her sensitivity, felt the shift around Corvin. He was like a slick, oily stone in the clear stream of the pack's spirit. But when she tried to send a wordless feeling of caution to Kael, she met the wall he had unconsciously built. Her warning slipped away, unacknowledged. The doubt between them had created a blind spot. Corvin's plan was simple and cruel. He targeted the pack's most vulnerable point, its memory of the Shadowfang. He began to spread whispers, not against Lyra directly, but about the nature of her power. She feels our fears, but who controls what she does with that feeling? He would muse to groups of warriors. The Shadowfang attacked our minds. The Luna, she can simply influence them. Where is the line? Can we ever be sure our thoughts are our own? The poison was insidious because it used a kernel of truth to grow a vine of paranoia. It preyed on the very mystery of Lyra's gift. Soon, the wary awe some still felt began to curdle into suspicion. People would fall silent when she entered a room, fearing she might be listening to their private doubts. The final, devastating blow came from Bram. Seeing his ideology being executed by his protégé, he made his move in a public gathering. He stood, his voice heavy with false sorrow. "My king, packmates, I speak with a heavy heart. We were wrong to call our Luna cursed, but in our gratitude for her salvation, we may have blinded ourselves to a new danger. A power that reads hearts is a power that can rule hearts. Without a howl to question, without a voice to debate, how do we know our will is free? Is the harmony we feel truly ours, or is it a song she is singing for us?" That question hung in the air, toxic and paralyzing. Kael, seated on his throne, looked at Lyra. He saw the devastation in her eyes, the betrayal. He felt, through the thin thread of their bond, her utter heartbreak. And part of him, the part poisoned by his own fear and Corvin's whispers, wondered, just for a second, was there a sliver of truth in it? Had he become a puppet to a beautiful, silent melody? That tiny fracture of doubt from the Alpha himself was all the poison needed. It flooded the pack's spirit. The unity they had found after the battle shattered. Sides were drawn, those who trusted their Luna's heart and those who now feared her silent influence. Lyra stood in the center of the storm, accused of the very thing she had fought against, mental domination. The bond between her and Kael, once their greatest strength, was now a frozen, painful tether. She looked at him, her eyes asking the only question that mattered. Do you believe them? Kael, trapped between his love for her and his terror of being a weak king, could not answer. His silence was louder than any accusation. The Heartsinger's song had been corrupted. The well of the pack's unity had been poisoned. And from the sidelines, Corvin watched, a smile playing on his lips. The first phase of his plan was complete. The king and his Luna were isolated from each other, and a pack divided is a pack easily conquered. Chapter 15. The Resonance of Truth.
The great hall was a crypt of tension. The divide was no longer whispered. It was a chasm carved through the heart of the Silvermane pack. On one side stood the elders, Corvin, and those whose fear had been masterfully cultivated. Their suspicion was a cold, hard wall. On the other stood Gareth, Marcus, the healers, the young pups' mothers, and warriors who remembered the resonant wave that had saved them. Their faith was fierce, but it was defensive, hurting. And in the center, standing alone before the obsidian throne, was Lyra. She felt the weight of every gaze, the jagged edges of their fractured emotions scraping against her heightened senses. It was agony. But the deepest wound was the silent, frozen distance from Kael. He sat upon his throne, not as her mate, but as a judge, his stormy eyes clouded with a conflict that was tearing him in two. The bond between them was a thin, aching thread, stretched to breaking. Elder Bram stepped forward, his earlier false sorrow now replaced with grim triumph. The question stands, Alpha. For the safety of the pack's free will, the Luna's influence must be regulated, confined, for her own protection and for ours. You would cage the wolf who saved you? Gareth growled, his hand on his sword. We would muzzle a power we do not understand, Corvin countered, his voice slick and reasonable. Until safeguards are in place, how can we trust what we cannot comprehend? The debate erupted into a chaos of shouted fears and loyalties. Kael watched it, a roaring in his ears. He saw Lyra flinch as the hostile emotions battered her. He felt through that thin thread her profound isolation, a loneliness deeper than her years in the exile cabin. This was his fault. He had let doubt in. He had built the wall. And now his kingdom, his home, was shattering around it. Lyra closed her eyes. The noise, the fear, the hatred, it was a dissonance far worse than the Shadowfangs. That had been an external evil. This was a sickness from within, and it was fueled by the one thing she could not fight with harmony, truth twisted by fear. She felt her own terror rising, a black wave threatening to drown her fragile shield. Then a memory surfaced, Theron's voice in the glacial cave. You must feel it, but you must not drown in it. The shield is not a wall, it is a filter. And another, your power lies in this internal orchestra. You can mute one instrument, amplify another. She had been trying to mute the entire world, to block out the pain. But that was not her strength. Her strength was resonance, understanding, not to silence the discord, but to transmute it. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and then she did the most courageous thing she had ever done. She dropped her shield completely. She opened herself wide, utterly vulnerable to the full, brutal force of the pack's emotional storm. The impact was physical. She staggered, a silent cry on her lips. She felt Bram's bitter triumph, Corvin's calculating ambition, the followers' craven fear. She felt Gareth's furious loyalty, the healer's compassionate anguish, the mother's protective rage, and she felt Kael's torment, a tempest of love, duty, fear of failure, and a crushing, profound regret. It was a searing, beautiful, horrific symphony of truth, unfiltered, unvarnished. She did not resist it. She let it flood through her. She became the vessel, the heart singer. Then she began to work, not on them, on herself. She found the core of her own truth, her own love for this pack, for her mate, a truth as solid and unshakable as the stone-tooth peaks. She amplified that within her soul. She let it become the dominant note in the orchestra of her being. And then she began to broadcast. It was not an influence, it was not a manipulation, it was a revelation.
She projected her own internal state, the raw, overwhelming influx of their feelings, now processed through the lens of her own unwavering love and sorrow. She sent back their own fear, but reflected through her understanding. She sent back Bram's bitterness, tinged with her pity for his rigid, shrinking world. She sent back Corvin's ambition, layered with her clear perception of its hollow, poisonous core.